Hello, everybody. Welcome to Help Wanted. This is a job interview-style candidate forum designed to help you, the voters, decide who should work for you in the U.S. Senate. My name is Suzanne Murphy. I'm from WMPG, Southern Maine Community Radio from USM. And on behalf of the Maine League of Young Voters, thank you all very much for coming. Thank yourselves. This beautiful evening, bringing yourself inside to a black box theater. Tonight, we're very pleased to learn more about the 4 Democratic candidates running for their party's nomination for U.S. Senate, and we are pleased to help voters make the best decision on primary day, June 12th. Now, you may notice that there are a few people missing from the stage this evening. We made a hard push to get the Republican primary candidates to the stage, but all of them turned down our request to speak with our community tonight. No. Unenrolled candidates running for the Senate were not invited because they will not face a primary. So this is geared toward the primary, which again, June 12th. Write that down. Let's meet the people behind tonight's event. The League of Young Voters Election Committee researches and interviews all candidates running for office to help voters make the most sound decision on Election Day. This year's Elections Committee includes Emma Halas O'Connor, who is the chair, Patrick Banks, Wells Lyons, Eric Poulin, Zach Ankers, Pat Roche, Steve Barry, Gabby Pierce, Nisha Swinton, and Kyalani Anderson-Andre. They've collected candidate questionnaires, they've conducted follow-up interviews, and then they've generated many of tonight's questions. Let's give them a round of applause for all the work they've already done. We'd also like to thank our co-sponsors tonight, Lucid Stage, our host for the evening, WMPG, Southern Maine Community Radio from USM. Lisa Bunker is recording tonight's forum for WMPG. It will be aired tomorrow, 8:30 to 10 a.m. and 8:30 to 10 p.m. on WMPG 90.9, 104.1. Another co-sponsor who's also taping tonight, Community Television Network. Brian Knobloch is recording tonight's debate for airing on CTN sometime within a week or so. We don't have a definite date on that. Our also co-sponsoring tonight are the Maine People's Alliance, Southern Maine Workers Center, Southern Maine Community College Political Science Club, Think Tank, Maine's Majority PAC, the University Neighborhood Association, and the West End Neighborhood Association. We'd also like to thank the following organizations for contributing questions to tonight's forum: the Bicycle Coalition of Maine, and Maine Citizens for Clean Elections. We'll have our candidates introduce themselves in just a few minutes. But first off, let's review our format for this evening's job interviews. The event setup will feature an interview area here on stage. I will direct questions from over here on the side, and I will call candidates up to the mic at certain points when it is their turn. The forum will be divided into 3 rounds, each of which is designed to allow you to compare candidates in different ways. You can submit specific questions for any candidates by writing those questions on a piece of paper at the beginning of the forum, or by tweeting @MaineLeague during the forum as the rounds unfold. All candidates will be allowed 90 seconds to introduce themselves at the start of the intro round, and 90 seconds to answer each question in every round. Gabby from the Elections Committee will be keeping time and indicating to candidates from off stage using color-coded lights. Candidate order has been selected at random prior to the event and will be as follows: Benjamin Pollard, Matthew Dunlap, Cynthia Dill, and John Hink. Please note that after our program is over, we will have time for candidates to speak directly with audience members and to conduct a ranked choice voting straw poll based on who you think had the best performance of the evening. We will announce the winner this evening approximately 20 minutes after the end of the program, so stick around. Okay, you guys ready? Let's jump into round 1. We will begin tonight's forum with the introductions of the candidates and a hypothetical scenario question drafted by the Elections Committee to show the candidates' decision-making processes and the principles that they would apply to the job in Washington. For the introductions, we are going to literally put candidates on the spot by having them come up here and stand in these bright lights. So it's bright enough over there, but you can come up here one at a time next to me. Our first candidate, we will turn to Benjamin Pollard. Mr. Pollard, could you please come up and stand by this microphone? How's that? Okay. In 90 seconds, please introduce yourself to the audience by stating the town you currently live in, your occupation, and what one of your 5-year goals as a U.S. Senator would be.
All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Benjamin Pollard, and I am the president of an ecologically sustainable construction company. I grew up in Blue Hill, and I currently live in Portland. Within 5 years, I would like to have served in a leadership role of a movement of the citizens of the earth, in which all of us will have worked together to have eradicated hunger worldwide, created the universal nuclear disarmament and the abolition of the nuclear power industry, reversed the increase of carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere, protected the Earth's remaining biological diversity, and created peaceful resolution to the conflicts between Israel and Palestine, India and Pakistan, and China and Tibet, and ended other major violent conflicts around the world as well. While these goals are admittedly ambitious, I believe that today we are at a turning point in history of the utmost importance, and that we face a choice between creating a transition to a culture of peace and ecological sustainability, or continuing down a path of economic and ecological collapse, which, combined with the existence and proliferation of nuclear weapons, could result in the destruction of human civilization and most forms of life on Earth. I hope you will join me in making the bright future, which I know is ahead of us, into a reality.
You have another part to your intro here. Thanks. We're getting rolling here. They'll learn from you, okay? All right, here's your hypothetical scenario once you are in the Senate. You are working with other senators to craft legislation. Well, craft legislation intended to create jobs. Which of the following proposals would you advocate to include? Please respond with either A, B, or C, and why. A, reduce the corporate tax rate. B, reduce workplace safety regulations. C, pass federal stimulus legislation similar to the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Which one of those would you put into crafting legislation intended to create jobs?
All right, so I have a limited menu of options here, so I'm choosing multiple choice. The one that's closest to my answer is C. I do believe we need to invest in infrastructure. We have roads and bridges which are collapsing. We need high-speed internet around the country. I believe that with the higher cost of petroleum, we need to invest in a rail network around the nation, both standard rail and high-speed rail. I've actually just gotten back from England, and it's delightful riding on the trains. I enjoy it very much, and it's a great way to save petroleum, conserve petroleum. I think, in addition, if I could expand upon, the similarity to that JOB Act, I do think we do need to reduce the regulatory burden which is facing corporations. And as a small business owner, I'm very aware that it's very challenging to provide employment opportunities. The Economist magazine had a cover story a few weeks ago called "Overregulated America," which talked about just how cumbersome the regulations are. So we need to achieve goals. We need legislation which is simple and concise and logical and easy to comply with while achieving the basic goals. I think we also need to invest in education and job training. I think there's an opportunity for volunteerism among Americans to help teach basic skills such as literacy as well as more advanced job skills.
Thank you. There's also a follow-up that the Southern Maine Workers Center wanted to ask to what your answer was there. So their question is, how does your response promote worker dignity and a just economy?
Okay.
90 seconds.
So I think it's critical that workers take pride in what we do and have dignity and are treated well and respectfully. I'm both the worker, I'm at this point the worker of the company. I'm a carpenter and a mason, and I think providing education opportunities, one thing I should say, I think one of the best ways to reform the education system is to repeal the No Child Left Behind Act, and the federal standards and regulations really impede the ability of teachers to be creative in the classroom and to do what really is an art form, which is bringing students to love the learning, the act of learning, the idea of learning. So I think a lot of education investment should be done at the state and local level, but that really providing meaningful work in the construction trades. Another thing I think we should do in terms of job stimulus is invest in energy efficient remodeling of our housing stock and commercial buildings, and that both creates jobs, it also reduces our carbon dioxide emissions and saves people money. So I think that's a real winner as far as job stimulus. And by going along with living wage, increasing wages to standards where people can live at a decent standard of living, I think we can increase the dignity of workers as well.
Thank you very much. Candidate Pollard.
Thank you.
And now return to Matthew Dunlap. Could you please come on up in, we'll put you on the spot. Okay. In 90 seconds, please introduce yourself by stating the town you live in, your occupation, and one of your 5-year goals as a U.S. Senator.
Well, my name's Matt Dunlap, and I live in Old Town now. I grew up in Bar Harbor and have spent my whole life in Maine, grew up on a farm, and worked in a variety of different capacities, including extensive work as a cook and a bartender, and worked in academic offices, and have had extraordinary opportunities to serve as a state representative and as Secretary of State. In 5 years, what I'd hoped to be doing is be back here and talking with you again about the same types of conversations that we've had this year around generating a better economy, a better future with greater prosperity than what we have seen in the last decade, and perhaps platform a new campaign to build on those successes around things like job prosperity, student debt, protecting our environment, tax fairness, a better health care system than what we're facing right now. All the things that I've heard about over the last few months that hopefully we'll have crafted some solutions to that we can further develop success for the 5-6 years after that.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Dunlap, your hypothetical scenario question is, a Republican majority in Congress under a Republican president is planning to introduce a bill to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Democrats plan to filibuster the bill. In the meantime, bipartisan legislation which would end the filibuster is up for a vote. Would you vote to end the filibuster, eliminating the option of filibustering the repeal of the Affordable Care Act? Please answer yes or no and explain.
Would I vote to end the filibuster? I would not vote to end the filibuster because it is a valuable tool to give the minority some say in how legislation is crafted. As far as the Affordable Care Act would be affected by that, I believe that no one bill can solve all of our problems in any case. And I think there's a lot more that has to be done with health care, regardless of what happens under the current scenario now with the Supreme Court pending decision on the Affordable Care Act, or some other iteration of legislation that comes forward. I do believe there has to be some reform to the filibuster rules, but to simply end the filibuster would then give no one the voice that they would need, especially if we were serving in a minority party with the other party's nominee as the president. I think ending the filibuster at that juncture would probably be working against ourselves in that longer-term scope of things.
Great. And as a follow-up to that, Think Tank, a local small business in Portland, wants to know what legislative measures you will support as a U.S. Senator to make health care affordable for small businesses. What can you do to make local co-ops a more viable option, for instance?
Well, I think local co-ops are just one of many proposals that we need to introduce and discuss. what we really need to do with healthcare is everything that we discuss about healthcare has to be considered as part of the greater solution or the greater problem. We treat so many things as if they're not part of the problems that have created such high healthcare costs, high insurance costs. We also have to make sure that whatever system we put in place also makes the healthcare field an attractive one for people to get into the healthcare profession. Right now, we just create a system of high-paid bureaucrats who we used to call doctors and nurses. I think that a program like a health co-op is something that's incredibly important. But one of the things I've discovered in this discussion about healthcare is that when we talk about containing costs, what we are not saying is that one of the reasons why people don't want to see costs contained is because they see their profits be cut. So I think we have to address this from an integrated approach from both the delivery side, the insurance side, and with an eye towards providing excellent health care for the patient so that the patient doesn't have to worry about going bankrupt because they get sick. That's got to be our goal in the long term.
Okay, thank you. Matthew Dunlap. Cynthia Dill, come on up. Put on the spot here. All right. So please introduce yourself, town you currently live in, occupation, one of your 5-year goals as senator.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Cynthia Dill, and I currently live in the beautiful town of Cape Elizabeth with my 2 kids, Harrison and Isabel, 17 and 15. I'm married to Tom Clark. I have a lot of jobs, like many of you. First and foremost, I'm a mother. I'm also a lawyer. I serve in the state senate. I represent District 7, which is Cape Elizabeth, South Portland, part of Scarborough. I'm the president of the Friends of the Maine Woods, which is a statewide nonprofit organization that's founded to promote the creation of a Maine Woods National Park. I teach Introduction to American Government at Southern Maine Community College, and I do a lot of housework. And I think what's on my mind as I speak to this group is the inability of young people to afford college. And there's a couple pieces of legislation that are currently pending in the Congress that I'd like to work on. There's a bill in the House and a bill in the Senate that would reform the way students can get college loans and the role of government in supporting students, as well as expand the Pell Grant program. So I think, first of all, making college affordable is critically important because we all know that with a college education you have a higher likelihood of having a job, you have a higher likelihood of making more money and having economic security, and economic security in families is what's really going to move America forward. In addition to student loans,
I'm so sorry.
oh, that's okay.
We'll have to stop.
Student loans is good enough, thanks.
Yeah, okay, hold on. No, no, no. Please, please.
Oh, sorry.
Please come back. No, I have to give you your hypothetical
Okay.
scenario, which is, these are really great. Okay, your hypothetical scenario question is, a bill is up for vote that would allow gay couples to receive the legal rights of marriage, but the legislation ensures that these couples could only be granted these rights through civil unions, not marriage. How would you vote in favor of or opposed, and why?
I would vote opposed to a civil union law because I think it would, in large part, stop the momentum towards marriage equality. And I think what gay couples want and deserve is marriage equality. I think there's a difference between a civil union and a marriage, and I respect the desire of gay people to be married, and so I would oppose.
Okay. And a follow-up question from the West End Neighborhood Association. How will you communicate with constituents in a way that is free of political euphemism and empty rhetoric?
Well, Twitter is a good way
Isn't that a great
to
question?
manage your communication. You can't put a lot of hyperbole in Twitter. No, I think communication is critically important, and I think that one of my strengths is communication. I'm very direct. Sometimes that gets me in trouble, but I tend to communicate very directly. I'm a big social media user. I am actively on Facebook and Twitter to engage people in an environment that's comfortable and kind of one-on-one. I also believe that as a United States Senator, I would conduct community forums and really try to be with people on a regular basis to stay in touch with the challenges that Maine families and that the people living here in Maine have.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cynthia Dill. And John Hink, come on up. Adjust the microphone as needed. Yeah. So please, in 90 seconds. Please introduce yourself, your town you live in currently, your occupation, and what is one of your 5-year goals as U.S. Senator.
Okay. Thanks to Lucid Stage, WMPG, and to the League of Young Voters, who I liked as the League of Pissed Off Voters, but they're as good as ever. My name is John Hink. I am a state legislator. I'm a lawyer representing consumers, investors, environmental interests in complex litigation. I'm Juliet's husband and Darcy's dad. I do some housework, and I do more buying food and cooking. What other part of that?
What is one of your goals if you were elected to the U.S. Senate and that you want to accomplish in your basically the first 5 years of the 6-year term?
It's going to be a trial of fire for any senator. At the end of this year, the Bush tax cuts are set to expire, and at the same time, because the Senate and Congress didn't reach agreement on budget, we have a whole bunch of fixed budget cuts that are going to go in if something isn't done. I would like to be part of that discussion. I think too often it's been dominated by big money, vested interests. I think we need more senators that are focused on the interests of ordinary working people. I'd like to be part of that. I'd like to see that our tax system is fairer. I would like to see that we move toward balancing the budget, but not on the backs of the middle class, as we've done in the past, and instead do it in a way that's fair.
All right, now here is your scenario question, hypothetical scenario, once you're elected. You
I'm
ready?
afraid of this one.
Okay.
I've seen what's going on. I couldn't answer any of those. Thank you.
A bill is up for the vote that would create a federal mandate on clean energy. The bill would require that half of all energy production in the U.S. would be derived from renewable energy sources. But there's also a requirement that at least 20% of the energy must come from nuclear sources. How would you vote? Yay or nay, and why?
Well, I have to tell you that that bill would not match my vision for our energy future. It seems to me the highest priority that we should be focusing on is energy efficiency. I think that the national government should be leading the way in pushing energy efficiency. Renewable energy is certainly useful. I frequently support it. I don't think that we have to ban nuclear power. I do think if we made it pay its own costs, if we internalized the cost of bad power, it wouldn't be competitive. For example, years ago, it was given an exemption, the Price-Anderson Act, from insuring themselves in the event of a catastrophic accident. That's a subsidy. We should take it away. So if we made some market changes, it wouldn't matter whether we passed that bill or not, but I think in the form you described it, I'd oppose it.
Okay. And as a follow-up to that, considering the validity of climate change is still challenged on the floor of the U.S. Senate, how will you shape the debate in Washington to pass comprehensive climate change legislation?
Certainly that legislation is critical. I've already lobbied Congress, including the U.S. Senate, on energy climate legislation. I was part of legislators around the country that came together to try and get it passed a couple of years ago. And, there was a possibility of getting something passed that was decent. We came very, very close. I would like to believe that you can make progress on those priorities. It is going to be difficult getting it past the climate deniers. I've gotten very used to pushing progress in the energy area without putting that issue in people's face. I don't think we should deny it. Climate is a huge problem. Human-induced climate change is a huge problem, but if some people can't tolerate that discussion, let's move forward on the energy agenda without forcing them to back down. I'm afraid we can't change the nature of the Senate overnight, but we can make progress.
Great. Thank you very much. John Hink. Okay, on to round 2, in which you get to stay in your seats. Isn't that great? All right, the Elections Committee, our co-sponsors, and you, our audience members, will have a chance to ask specific questions in this round to specific candidates. We're starting out with the Elections Committee, which has prepared a list of questions that are follow-ups to candidates' questionnaires or interviews that they have already received, and will even quote the candidate's specific response on occasion. Audience members can tweet questions to @MaineLeague to follow up on questions from the intro round. All right, starting with you, Mr. Pollard. The Maine People's Alliance asks, will you vote to allow the Bush tax credits to expire, at least for those making over $250,000 a year, and promise not to vote in favor of future tax cuts for the wealthy?
I will vote to allow the tax cuts to expire. I will not promise, and the wording was to ever cut
Promise
tax.
not to vote in favor of future tax cuts for the wealthy.
I will not make that promise. I don't think it's likely that I would vote in favor of tax cuts, but I do believe as a Federalist that we should be shifting our emphasis of government from the central government in Washington, D.C. to state and local governments. And I think if that ends up with an overall reduction in the federal tax burden upon individuals and a comparable increase in the state tax burden, that is something that I would consider supporting. I think a lot of things function better devolved to the state and local communities. But I do think we are dealing with a tax system that's deeply unfair, and the wealthiest individuals benefit the most from it. And I think it's really very disturbing, the figures on Mitt Romney's income and the percentage of income tax that he paid. We need to address this. The wealthiest members of society benefited the most from the economic prosperity. Those are the members of society who I believe should be held responsible for paying down the deficit.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Pollard. Mr. Dunlap, next is for you. The Southern Maine Workers Center wants to ask, the Obama administration is currently negotiating a Trans-Pacific Free Trade Agreement, also called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This trade agreement would be like NAFTA for the Pacific Rim and has the potential to open up free trade with dozens of countries. What labor and economic justice provisions would you want to see included in future trade deals?
Well, I think this has been the biggest problem that's faced working families in America today, are all the trade agreements that we have passed since NAFTA and even some before NAFTA. We have seen so much of our manufacturing go overseas following the good-paying jobs that are now no longer good-paying jobs, especially around the Pacific Rim. The specific things that I would like to see in any type of a trade agreement that we would engage in with another country or group of countries would have to include things like specific worker protections, specific environmental protections, and also protections for the businesses that would be impacted here in the United States, especially those industries that would be otherwise in direct competition with those countries in the manufacturing sector producing certain goods and services that would otherwise be produced here in the United States. So I think that would be just at the very highest level of things that we'd have to have ensured in any type of a trade agreement, that we're not just simply taking an American workforce and sending it overseas so that it could be working for much, much lower pay and under much less restrictive environmental and other protections that simply would hurt us in the long run.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for candidate Cynthia Dill. The University Neighborhood Association would like to know, if the Supreme Court strikes down President Obama's health care law, will you push to have Medicare cover all people as a single-payer program?
I certainly believe that we need universal health care. I think every American needs to have the security of knowing that if a health issue confronts them, that they can get treatment. And I'm just shocked that America has such a poorly managed healthcare system that incentivizes people to prolong treatment and has a fee-for-service model that really just kind of creates a system that leads to more treatment, more tests, and not treating someone holistically. Whether or not Medicare is the single-payer health program that would be beneficial, I'm not sure, but I certainly would study it. I truly hope that the Supreme Court does not find the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional. But if it does, then I will pour a lot of energy into finding a solution and an alternative, because it's clearly one of the most important issues facing this country.
Thank you. And next, for candidate John Hink, Nancy from the Bicycle Coalition of Maine has contributed this question. The price of gas is over $4 a gallon, and transportation costs add up to the highest percentage of household income in 50 years. Transportation infrastructure is in bad shape. What strategies will you use to rebuild our transportation system so that it is sustainable, healthy, and accommodating to all modes?
Well, I've already talked about the budget challenge that the country faces. We are going to have to do what might appear to be almost impossible right now. We need to face the problem of the deficit. We need to approach much fairer taxation. It is going to involve budget cuts as well. But I don't think those budget cuts should be focused on infrastructure. That is one of the areas where government can invest and make it work, make the economy work better for the private sector and for all of us. I would hope that the fact that the investments have been lagging for years might be an opportunity for us, that we can build an infrastructure that works for a modern economy. And it would include discovering some of the things we knew better in an earlier age in the United States, train travel, and also making our cities and rural areas bicycle friendly. I observe who the question came from, and I support the efforts that the Bicycle Coalition does, and I appreciate that that's a place that's going to have to get investment. It just has to be a priority.
Thank you, John Hank.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to do another round of questions, starting again with Mr. Pollard. In a recent interview with Bill Nemitz on March 4th, you said you believe this, quote, "this spring is the time for the U.S. to launch strikes," end quote, against Iran. Pentagon officials and Obama administration officials say that strikes against Iran should be a last resort. Can you explain why you think we should be bombing Iran right now?
I cannot explain that because I've actually changed my position on that. And I did have an interview on MPBN in which I discussed the fact that I had changed that position. I can explain what I was thinking at the time, which is that I had read a report that was issued by the Bipartisan Policy Center, the National Security Project, which said that for, briefly, and I only have a few seconds here, but, and this is a complex issue, that were Iran to develop a nuclear weapon, that Israel and Iran would be in a Cuban Missile-like, crisis-like state of detente in which both sides would have the strong incentive to strike first. And basically, this is a center founded by Senator Mitchell, Senator Daschle, Senator Robb, and Senator Dole, who were all former House Senate Majority Leaders. They came to the conclusion that it's absolutely unacceptable for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. And at that time, Israel was talking very seriously about making an attack. And my feeling was it would be much easier for Iran to retaliate against Israel. Whereas if America said, we can't allow you to take this, and I did say in that interview we should issue a warning first that if you don't disband, which didn't make it in the column, if you don't disband your nuclear program, then we would attack, and I thought that wouldn't work. I am now much more dovish, and I hope, I only have 15 seconds, but if you can listen to my interview on MPBN, I go into more detail about this. It's on the website.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pollard. Mr. Dunlap, in your answers to the League questionnaire, you expressed very strong opposition to specific counterterrorism policies adopted by the Obama administration, such as indefinite detention of terrorism suspects, the extrajudicial execution of American citizens, and the use of military tribunals to try terrorism suspects. Are you now willing to publicly express opposition to these Obama counterterrorism policies and continue to oppose them throughout your campaign if and once elected?
Yes. Either you're going to be part of a nation that stands up for the rule of law, or you're not going to be part of a nation that stands up for a rule of law. And I think that the whole premise of the American Republic has been equal justice for all. And I do not believe that the counterterrorism tactics that you have mentioned in your question are effective. They certainly have not prevented acts of terrorism in the past. I don't believe in things like domestic spying, the detentions in Guantanamo Bay. If these people are truly criminals, they should be tried as criminals and then should not simply be held in limbo indefinitely in defiance of the rule of law. And I could never support such activity on any type of elongated basis. And history has shown that that such practices really yield no favorable results for those who practice them. So I think we need to stay to our principles and make sure that everyone who is brought before us as an aggressor is treated as anyone who would appear in a court.
I didn't read a second part of it because it was the question I asked was big enough, but there is a second part to this question. I'm just going to throw it in here. You also said that extrajudicial executions of American citizens is a violation of the Constitution. So do you believe that President Obama is in violation of the Constitution?
I'm not a judge, and I think it's important to understand that interpretations of what constitutes constitutionality really is left to those on the bench. However, it is my opinion as a citizen that such acts are outside of the scope of the Constitution, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering that second question. Candidate Cynthia Dill, in your League of Young Voters questionnaire, you stated it was acceptable to benefit from super PACs because, quote, these are the rules and candidates need to be competitive, end quote. Can you describe a situation in which you took money from a PAC and used it in a way to benefit your constituents?
Well, some of you joined me in my protest of President Obama at the museum where I was selling super packs of lobster cookies to benefit the Preble Street Resource Center. And that was my statement, somewhat political theater, of my objection to the current state of affairs when it comes to money in politics. If I'm elected to the United States Senate, I will support campaign reform. I support public federal elections. I also support the Disclose Act. I'm trying to think. In this election, I have been endorsed by two PACs. One is WAND, the Women's Advancement for New Directions, and they have sent me a check for $500, and I've used that money to do everything that you need to do for a campaign. I've never accepted money from, at least that I can recall, from a PAC in my life as a legislator. I could be forgetting. I did have a leadership PAC, but I don't recall ever accepting money from a PAC. But I would like to think that what I do on a day-to-day basis benefits my constituents.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, candidate Mr. Hink. In response to our question about combating student loan debt, you suggested an increase in Pell Grant funding, yet the majority of students saddled with debt are ineligible for that program. How exactly would you increase this funding, and what steps do you propose the Senate take to reduce costs of higher education for students that still won't qualify for Pell Grants, yet face a minimum of at least $20,000 in student loan debt? And what steps can Congress take to alleviate students' existing debt? That's a big question.
I guess I get the budget questions. So what I'm going to say departs for a second. I've agreed with a lot of what's been said here today, but even before the applause, I was so taken with what Matt Dunlap had to say in his last answer that I wanted to second that. On the question of Pell Grants, much harder. I'll give that question to Matt if he wants it. No. I think we could expand the eligibility for Pell Grants or have similar programs, but I've already described my awareness of the difficult budget situation that the nation has faced, and I would be careful not to pander just because I'm talking to the League of Young Voters and say that any senator can go down to Washington and make education a lot cheaper for people today. I do think we need significant education overhaul. I've been wondering whether some of it would come not from government direction, but from a change in the way that the colleges and universities operate. It seems to me that there ought to be choices that include universities that remain and colleges that remain excellent in education and maybe not offer some of the broad arrays of things that colleges feel they have to do to be competitive. Now, I did just find out that Bowdoin College is ranked as having some of the best food in the country, and I would hate to talk them out of that. I think it's fantastic that a Maine-based school would have be known for having good food. But I'm talking about some of the facilities that traditionally colleges didn't have anyhow. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to do one more round of questions here. We're going to take a short break after that, and then we'll do the final round, which is a different format. All right, Mr. Pollard. This question is from Brian from Occupy Maine. He writes, "The Occupy movement has changed the national conversation in a dramatic way. Inequality in income, opportunity, and wealth is openly talked about as widely as before the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression. The Occupy movement carries this message, resonating with people across a broad spectrum of the middle and lower income brackets. What can the Occupy movement do to bring this message to the broader public?"
I believe the Occupy movement has done an excellent job of bringing this message to the broader public. I think the movement will continue to unify, to evolve, and I've actually had a thought. The word Occupy, to me, it sounds somewhat militaristic, and I am a pacifist, and I believe in sometimes peace through strength. Theodore Roosevelt said the reason for a good navy is not a provocation to war, but it's the surest guarantee of peace. But I would say continuing to evolve, gathering feedback from people outside the movement of what's working, what's not working. Personally, Occupy has, as I was saying, a sort of an aggressive tone, and I've thought of a new term of Unify Maine, that really, and I'm thinking of making some T-shirts for the campaign that say, "I am the 100%, and then we're all in this together" on the back. And I grew up in Blue Hill with a number of members of the 1%, and some of them are very generous philanthropists and have created a lot of opportunity for people and run very excellent companies. And I think, to reach out to the wealthy individuals and appeal to their better nature and say, "Can you please be more philanthropic?" rather than an adversarial relationship, which I think there's an element of both, but I think of how does the movement evolve is difficult in 90 seconds, but I think focusing on unification rather than division is one way it could evolve.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Dunlap, as a former Secretary of State charged with overseeing fair elections, what is your opinion on the recent attempts to pass voter ID laws and other statutes that make it more difficult for voters to get to the polls and cast their ballots? Do you see the U.S. Senate as the appropriate venue to advocate for easier access to the ballot and to speak out against laws designed to make voting more exclusive?
I think the Senate is one place where such advocacy can occur. Of course, elections across the country are truly run by the states. My opinion of voter ID laws, the recent attempt to end Election Day registration in the state of Maine, I have to say is one of profound disappointment mixed with moments of abject horror. We worked very, very hard when I was Secretary of State to provide very expansive access to the ballot for everyone. We were the first state in the nation to have the best implementation of the Military and Overseas Voter Empowerment Act. We had a very successful deployment of the accessible voting solution for people with disabilities, all with a mind towards making sure that everyone had the right to exercise the franchise. And some of that direction did come from Congress, so Congress doesn't have all bad ideas. But nonetheless, the movement around the country to have photo ID in order to obtain a ballot or to end such practices as Election Day registration or other restrictions, I believe are cynical attempts to control the ballot and to prevent vast sections of the demographic from participating in our democracy, and I would oppose them vigorously in any form, including the United States Senate.
Okay, thank you. Cynthia Dill, an audience member, writes, if you were in the U.S. Senate if you had been in the U.S. Senate in 2008, would you have voted to support the bank bailout, knowing that many major economists said it was vital to prevent global economic collapse? And then I've got a yes or no follow-up question. Would you have voted for the bank bailout in 2008?
My recollection is that the bank bailout was part of the overall stimulus package. I could be mistaken about that, but I believe that it was a huge effort to prevent our country from sliding into economic collapse. And so while I may have supported the banks being shored up, I would nevertheless hold them accountable today. There was clearly actions taken that were, in my view, violations of the law, and not a single person has been held accountable for the terrible greed on Wall Street that led to the collapse of our economy in 2008. So I've actually sued banks as a civil rights lawyer, and I believe that banks should be held accountable. I think banks and insurance companies are the two institutions that have the potential to do the most harm in our society and should be reasonably regulated. And I don't support this notion that somehow the free market should be applied to banks or insurance companies.
Okay. I'm not sure if that was a yes or a no, so I'm going to let that just be your answer.
Yeah.
I think it was a yes. Okay, Mr. Hink. What specific proposals do you think are necessary in order to increase transparency and accountability in the United States Senate?
I, in all cases, would favor complete transparency. We just recently had a vote in the Maine legislature, and it was whether or not the working papers of the governor should be available under the Freedom of Access Act in Maine. My vote was yes. If it came to it, I would vote in favor of the legislature being required to do that. One of the issues that was raised about that is that the governor actually has staff. The legislature has very little. But nonetheless, I think transparency is fairly easy. It is just doing things in the public eye. I think the United States Senate has tradition that allows them to avoid transparency too often. And it seems to me that we have to overcome tradition in a lot of things that the Senate is doing. Earlier there was a discussion of the filibuster rule. I might not overturn the filibuster rule today because it's important sometimes. However, I think that senators should have to stand up and actually speak to the issue on hand if they're going to try and filibuster. Similarly, their papers, their workings, everything they do is done on behalf of the public, and the public should have access to it, and I would stand by that as long as I live.
Okay. This final round is designed to help candidates distinguish their platforms from their opponents and to highlight for us why they should be elected as their party's nominee. In this round, candidates will be invited to ask 2 questions directed towards their opponents. So we start with you, Mr. Pollard. We now invite you to ask your questions for candidates Dill and Hink. And you can start with whichever one you want.
And I'll start by asking you, Senator Dill, this
Can you
question.
speak up? Because that is not an amplified mic.
Sure, I will speak up. Given that there will be a 3-way race, oh, this is the old version, but okay. Sorry.
Who is this for?
Senator Dill, and I revised
Okay.
it slightly. It didn't
All
get
right.
in here, but it's okay. Given that there will be a 3-way race for the Senate seat, will you please describe which of your views any views that you believe will appeal to independent and Republican voters?
I don't hope to appeal necessarily to Republican voters at all. Although I do have a number of Republican supporters who vote for me in my election in Senate District 7. But it may be a 3-way race, and I think it's incredibly important that there's a strong progressive Democrat on the ballot, because the independent is going to set the goalpost somewhere in the center, and we know that the Republican candidate will be to the right. And unless we have somebody who's willing to stand up for the values of progressives in this community, our conversation will just shift. And I think that I'm the person for the job because, first of all, I have a record of success at winning elections. I am very clear on where I stand. I think that I have a very progressive record in terms of civil rights, in terms of economic diversity. I proposed expanding and was successful in sponsoring legislation that led to a high-speed internet network of 1,100 miles in rural Maine. I think that I am competent to go toe-to-toe with Angus King on some of the positions that he's taken. For instance, he vetoed a minimum wage law. He vetoed a law to expand the family medical leave. He spearheaded legislation that threw a number of severely injured workers off of workers' comp, and he left the state with over $1.2 billion in deficit. And I am perfectly comfortable having a campaign that looks forward. The tagline of my campaign is, "It's time for a new generation of leadership in Washington," and I think I'm the candidate that can best articulate that vision. Thank you.
Your time is up. And do you have another question for Mr. Hink?
I do, and I'm going to ask you the same question, and I did learn, actually, a skill, well, I won't use it. At the Hancock County Democrats, this fellow Jim Schatz told me how to make a statement into a question, so I'll modify it somewhat. Remember that, Matt? You were there, Honorable Secretary. So he ended it by saying, what is it? Don't you agree? Don't you agree?
We've done that in my committee, too.
So I believe, I would posit that our state is incredibly divided between the different political perspectives, and that to defeat Governor King and the Republican nominee in the general election, we will need a Democratic nominee who can appeal to independent voters, who are a larger group than Democrats or Republicans in Maine. Whether you appeal to Republicans or not, it's up to you, but can you please describe how your views will appeal to independent or possibly as well Republican voters?
The fact is that the views, by the way, I should thank you for the question, Ben. The views that I have accord well with the interests, including the economic interests, but other interests of the ordinary working Mainer. I think sometimes the nature of the debate in the United States and here in Maine makes it hard for people to see that. I think we have people who are promoting, for example, regressive taxation, and they manage to convince working people that it's in their interest to support that. I would like to see that those issues come out in the general election. Angus King, in my view, is like electoral comfort food. We know him, a little bit bland, but a smart man and a thinker. He's had his chance to push major reform, and he didn't seize it. Our country is facing a great number of challenges, and our U.S. Senate is getting less done than it ever has in my lifespan. Sending mac and cheese down to Washington is not good enough. We need somebody who's willing to accept those challenges, take them on, and work real hard to get it done. I would do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now moving on to candidate Dunlap. Please ask your questions of, is it also Cynthia Dill and John Hink?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we've had a chance tonight to talk a little bit about the rule of law, and I'm not an attorney, but we do have two attorneys who are running for this nomination. And given the pivotal role of the United States Senate in confirming justices to the U.S. Supreme Court, my question actually to both Cynthia Dill and John Hink is, which Supreme Court justice would you most like to see replaced, and why?
Ms. Dill, would you like to start?
I would like to see Samuel Alito replaced.
Why?
And why? Because, first of all, I think the confirmation of him was a poor example of how judicial confirmation should be handled, and because of his record of voting to restrict the civil rights of Americans, including a woman's right to choose. I could cite some cases, but I just think, it's a difficult question, but in my view, I would like to replace Samuel Alito with someone along the lines of Sonia Sotomayor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Those are more justices who align with my values, and I believe that since the court's makeup with Justices Alito and Scalia, and even Chief Justice Roberts, unfortunately, the decisions, the Citizens United case is an example of a very controversial decision that's done significant harm to this country by injecting large sums of money into the political process. And I would just note that earlier, when I said that President Obama should accept money from super PACs, my feeling is that those are the rules of the game and he should play by the same rules, but that doesn't mean that you can't fight to change the rules. And so I actually think that if the Supreme Court votes to repeal the Affordable Care Act, that as a United States Senator, what we could do is increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Hink, your response.
I'll have to overcome a lawyerly instinct to be careful when commenting on any judges who could possibly sit on my cases. I actually had a case, the Exxon Valdez oil spill, that went up to the Supreme Court. We had won a $5 billion judgment in the trial level, and it was brought down to $500,000 by the U.S. Supreme Court. In many ways, I can't imagine things going worse. So I'm going to swing for the fences. Change the Chief Justice. John Roberts should go. I think that John Roberts was not upfront when he testified in his nomination. He said, with another sports analogy, baseball analogy, that judges are only umpires. They just call the balls and strikes as they see them. He did not do that in the Citizens United case. He didn't do that in Bush v. Gore. I'm looking really closely at the Affordable Care Act case. But let's take Citizens United. That case made up law. We had a court, the Supreme Court back in the 1890s, the case was Santa Clara Railway, that decided that corporations were people under the law, persons under the law. That was not done by statute. That was not in the Constitution. That was made up. And they doubled down in Citizens United. They obviously weren't comfortable with it because they hardly talked about corporations in that decision. They talked about disadvantaged speakers, and they were referring to General Motors and ExxonMobil. Looks like my time is up.
Oh.
Chief Justice Roberts should go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, moving on to candidate Dill, please ask your questions for Ben Pollard and Matt Dunlap.
Do I have to use the questions that I sent in?
Up to you.
Okay.
You could stick to those two people, though, that would be.
Okay, sure. My first question is to Matt Dunlap. I was going to ask you if you supported a feasibility study of the Maine Woods National Park, which included the proposed gift of 70,000 acres and $40 million from Roxanne Quimby. And as a senator, whether or not you would vote to support that feasibility study. But now I'm thinking of asking you instead how it is that you baited a bear to make a bear blanket.
Well, I'll answer the second question since that's the one that you're asking me. When I was chair of the Fish and Wildlife Committee, we had a fair amount of controversy around the practices of bear hunting, and I hunt. I had never done it before, and so I decided to find out what it was all about myself. And over the course of several years, I worked with a group of people that I hunt with, and we set up a place near in Alton, nearby Old Town, and we spent 3 years trying different types of baits. And it was 3 years before we saw one. So one of the questions that I wanted answered was, is it as easy as the opponents say it is? And I discovered the answer to that was no. How I wound up with the blanket was we did a further study of those particular practices by working with a fellow who was working with a museum to procure specimens for students. And they were looking for a bear specimen. So I spent several months doing scientific documentation on a bear bait site, and we were successful. And that's how I wound up with that.
Okay. And Ms. Dill, do you have your question for Mr. Pollard?
Yes, my question for Mr. Pollard is, you have stated publicly that you don't believe employers who provide health insurance should be compelled to include contraception, even though this prescription is often used to treat medical conditions. It reduces the cost of health care and reduces unwanted pregnancies. Do you also believe that employers should be able to deny coverage for Viagra and drugs used to treat erectile dysfunction?
So this actually brings up an important point. I believe I am the most electable Democrat here on the stage because I have views which cross party lines. And my opposition to the Affordable Care Act, straying a bit from the question, is shared by many, I would say most Mainers, actually, especially Republicans, Independents, who I do plan to appeal to people across the entire political spectrum. And I think it's the reason why Scott Brown won the Senate race in Massachusetts, and I believe it's the reason why the Republicans retook the House and regained seats in the Senate. I think the issue of contraception, unfortunately, has been twisted in the political arena because I'm not opposed to contraception. In fact, I'm in favor of contraception. I think it's great for family planning, and I think people should use it. I'm also in favor of religious freedom, and I think we really need to be very careful about the role of the federal government in impeding the rights of religious organizations to make choices that they believe are moral. And so what I believe is if it's an organization such as the Catholic Church, which runs hospitals or universities, that we should be very careful, and I'm not in favor of a federal mandate that they would be required to provide a service to which they are opposed. I do think Catholics, both who've left the church or who are in the church, who believe the Catholic Church should reform its position on contraception, should be vocal and active. But I think I share views of many Mainers who are libertarians who are very conscientious of a slippery slope of the federal government impeding on religious and individual liberties.
Now, moving on to Mr. Hink, can you please ask your questions for Mr. Pollard and Mr. Dunlap, please?
This question is for Matt Dunlap. He's probably already prepared for it.
We'll see.
In 2006, I introduced a bill in the 123rd Maine legislature that would have instituted instant runoff or ranked choice voting, as it's sometimes called, for gubernatorial elections in Maine. As Secretary of State, you opposed my bill, citing what appeared to be plainly exaggerated costs and other complaints. If the bill had passed and been enacted, Maine likely would have never elected the current governor, Paul LePage, whether you like that or not. He clearly would not have gotten many second choice votes from the candidate who came in third place, Libby Mitchell. My question is, do you have any regrets for opposing positive electoral reform back then and not offering any constructive ideas on how Maine might have been able to move forward with instant runoff voting?
That's an excellent question. That particular piece of legislation, which I remember quite vividly because we talked about it quite a bit at the time, was something that I believe was based on some model legislation that had been wending its way around the country. And the costs were not exaggerated. Based on the technology that was being prescribed in the legislation, it would have cost approximately about somewhere around $9 million to implement across the state of Maine, money we did not have and was not provided for in the legislation. Subsequent to the defeat of that legislation, because of some of those material concerns, some of the structural problems with the bill, we did work with Representative Diane Russell and backed a proposal for a pilot project for ranked choice voting. Not truly instant runoff voting implies electronic voting machines, which were being decertified across the country at the time, which was another strategic problem with the legislation. I should also note that Representative Hink never spoke to me about the text of the bill before he submitted it, so we had no opportunity to help him improve the text of the bill.
Freshman error.
Which will give you a pass in the freshman era. The ranked choice voting bill, the pilot project, was also not successful, unfortunately, but I was very pleased to see what happened here in Portland with the mayoral election. I think that is a good pathway to have some type of mechanism so that people's voices can be recorded as they intended on a ballot. So I'm not opposed to ranked choice voting or runoff voting, but the structure has to be meaningful and recognizable to the voters.
Okay, thank you. And your last question, Mr. Hink, your last question of the evening to Mr. Pollard.
I did have a good one for Cynthia, but it wasn't given back to me. So I go to my Ben Pollard question. Let me see. I understand your distaste for the individual mandate that is part of the health care laws now known as Obamacare and Romney Care. Do you agree that we could avoid the individual mandate if the country simply adopted universal single-payer health care, and would you be upfront and vocal in your support of the adoption of such a healthcare system in America?
Thank you for the question, Representative Hink. I do believe that were we to adopt a nationwide single-payer system, we could achieve universal coverage, sort of by definition. I would not be vocal in my support because I do believe there is a role for the private health insurance industry, and I have just gotten back from England where there is a hybrid, and there's national health for those people who are not able to afford private health insurance, and for those of more means who would like shorter waiting times, better services, and who can afford private health insurance. But I do think that then that's an option, and I do think that the Medicaid, and there should be a single-payer option for anyone who's not able to afford private health insurance, and I think as much as possible we should focus on promoting economic prosperity so that individuals can have responsibility for maintaining their own health and lowering healthcare costs through proper nutrition and regular exercise, and also have a single-payer option to provide or to continue to discuss it for those of more limited means. I only have 30 seconds. The last thing I would just like to say in wrapping this up, this is an example of where I feel my views cross party lines. I'm new to this. I'm not part of the political establishment. I'm learning as I'm going. I'm going to end with a quote from John Lennon. He said, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope one day you'll join us and the world will live as one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the candidates for coming here tonight. Also want to thank you, our audience, for coming out on this beautiful evening and coming in here tonight. Thank you. And of course, all of our co-sponsors, especially Lucid Stage, CTN, and WMPG for taping this evening, and the League's Elections Committee for being here tonight and for making this forum possible. Many thanks to the League of Young Voters. We will be conducting that quick ranked choice voting straw poll, so if you didn't get a ballot, please raise your hand now, and you can still do that. You rank your favorite choices 1 through 4, and please get your ballots in within the next 10 minutes. One thing that we did want to say is if you didn't get your question that you submitted did not get asked, you can tweet at Maine League, and they will try to get an answer from the candidates going forward, right? So the candidates are available to speak to you one-on-one, and if you want to stick around, we will announce the winner of the straw poll in about 15, 20 minutes, right? Okay. I'm Suzanne Murphy from WMPG. Thank you so much. It was really my honor to be here.